What's going on, everybody? This is John J Gaming on the mic here, coming at you with a brand new episode of the FCS Dynasty here on NCAA 06, also featuring that next mod as well. We're getting ready to go ahead and start things out here in year number 6, and we got a good one, because if I have it mapped out correctly, we might be going through the first 5 weeks of this season, so it's going to be a lot of football to cover in this episode specifically. I hope you guys are excited for that. If you are, make sure you go ahead, smack that like button, hit that subscribe button as well if you do happen to be brand new to the channel. And with that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into it. So in week number 1, not only was there not any top 25 matchups to cover, it's usually pretty slow to start the season. There was only 2 top 25 teams that played at all. It was Northern Arizona. They were in the morning game. They took on Rhode Island at home, and Coach Kirby had a hard time after the first quarter. Northern Arizona, they were able to win that game 34-7. That does get them to 1-0 to start the season. However, we will have an upset early in this season as Utah State is able to handle its business against the Northwestern State Devils. They are able to beat Northwestern State 38-28 at home, as that's a big win for Utah State to start their season out. However, for Northwestern State, they continue to slide from last season, and they might fall out of the top 25 very quickly. Other week 1 games that did happen include basically a bunch of FCS versus FBS matchups. Columbia lost to Texas 34-17, although it was a very competitive game, at least in that first quarter. Rice lost to Sanford, losing to a Power 5 team 38-31. Although the Rice Owls did almost win, Sanford stormed back, especially in that fourth quarter. As for Norfolk State, they went on the road to take on the Oklahoma State Cowboys from the Big 12, and Norfolk State did not have the firepower, not able to score until the fourth quarter. They lost 38-14. And finally, our other quote-unquote FCS matchup that we did have was UMass. They took on SMU, and the UMass Mustangs, they win big 38-16. But now we move ourselves into week number 2, and in week number 2, there was a lot more games that certainly happened. We'll start with James Madison. They played their first game of the season against Tennessee Tech, and James Madison was able to pull it out 34-24 in their first game of the season. Brian Aldrauzi did go off. He ended up with 10 catches, 180 yards, and 2 touchdowns to bring James Madison over the top. As for Southeast Missouri State, they show that they are a team to be reckoning with this season, opening things up against UL Monroe, and it was never close, winning by 45 points in their home opener. As for the Western Carolina Catamounts, they start their national title defense, and Willie Beebe Jr. might be him. Dude ended up with 7 total touchdowns in his college debut. South Dakota never stood a chance in this one. As for Eastern Kentucky, they opened things up against the Elon Phoenix, and Eastern Kentucky wins 31-7 being your final score. Henderson having a great game himself, throwing for nearly 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. New Hampshire, meanwhile, is the preseason number 1, and they certainly showed it against Wofford on the road. New Hampshire winning 49-7, as one of your customs, Ernie Little, ends up with 3 touchdowns during the course of the game. However, we also saw our fair share of upsets, and it starts with Texas Southern. They lose to Morgan State on the road 38-35. It was a shocking loss for Texas Southern Tigers, who are a preseason number 13 team. Speaking of upsets, we almost had one in non-conference play with San Diego State. They come in ranked number 18 in the country, and they beat Northern Colorado, but very close in doing so. 37-34 was your final score. Sam Houston State, meanwhile, handled its business against San Jose State, the kickoff year number 6, as the Sam Houston State Cardiac Cats beat the Spartans 31-14 to start the season. However, Montana State will be going down as they lose to Mid-Tennessee State in a shocker. 32-20 is your score. Montana State will likely no longer be in the top 25. Also in trouble of leaving the top 25 is Arkansas Pine Bluff, as they only managed to put up 16 points in a loss to Ball State, who dating back to last season now is on a 4-game winning streak. The Akron Zips are trying to get back at it after an undefeated regular season. They started off against Oral Roberts, and while the Golden Eagles gave it their best shot, they are going to fall short against Akron 38-28. However, Montana will not be denied a deep playoff run this season, it seems like, as they took it out on Southern Utah, 62-6 being your score. Jamison Skinner particularly was sharp in this one, 350 passing yards and 6 touchdowns to his name. However, Utah State, who just got into the top 25 following their win against Northwestern State back in week number 1, they traveled to play against Mississippi Valley State as the Utah State Aggies win 31-28. The Delta Devils now on a 5-game losing streak dating back to last year. However, South Carolina State will not be so lucky, as in their home opener they actually lose to the Troy Trojans. 36-31 was your final score. John Achilles, who's one of your guys' customs, he played well in the loss though, having 187 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns as well. Tennessee Martin, however, had a scare against the Harvard Crimson coming out of the Ivy League, but Henry Paris, who was making his first collegiate start, he was determined to make sure that his team won. 38-31 was your final score, as the Skyhawks get to 1-0 to start year number 6. As for Texas State, however, it looks like they're going to have to find their offensive identity, and fast. They lose to Western Michigan in a very shocking result. Western Michigan not only winning, but dominating the game. 29-13 ends up being your final score. In the last top 25 game that happened was Nicholls State. They beat the Cornell 49-17, as Richards, who's the new quarterback for the Colonels, 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. What a way to start, replacing a legend. But outside of the top 25, one notable result that I did want to talk about though was that Kent State did beat the Maine Black Bears 45-14. It's an impressive first win for the Golden Flashes to start the season, as Maine just could not get anything going on the offensive end with any consistency. Not to mention, their defense was very soft too. And on top of that, we have Eastern Michigan beat Murray State 27-7, and that gets the Eagles to number 22 in the country. We had New Mexico State beat Charleston 24-17, and that gets New Mexico State Aggies to number 24 in the nation. Northwestern State also gets back into the top 25 after a 40-23 win over UMKC. But we do come across our first top 25 matchup of the season, all the way in week number 3, where we'll see those Akron Zips take on the Nicholls State Colonels. And Akron, they do come in ranked number 15 in the country, whereas the Nicholls State Colonels, they come in ranked number 12 in the country, feeling good after their opening road victory against the Cornell Big Red, as they are led by a new quarterback. Travis Richards takes over for the Nicholls State Colonels. It's his first full year as the starting quarterback, so we'll see what he's capable of doing, as John Johnson, he's going to be in the shotgun formation for the Akron Zips. Jumping into the second quarter of action, nothing too crazy happening so far until we see a strike in the back of the end zone, giving Akron the lead, at least for a little bit. But it will not take long until Nicholls State ends up responding, as we got a nice run up the left-hand side, down the sideline, and the Colonels right away, they will answer back, tie the football game up at 10 apiece. We got ourselves a really good football game on our hands, but Nicholls State starts to take over a little bit in the second quarter, as Greg Roberts, he's going to get his hands on the football. He is actually going to garner an interception here, and that interception will set up this 25-yard field goal attempt for Webster, who already has kicked a more difficult field goal, a 42-yarder, which ended up hitting through the uprights, as he had sent one through the uprights as well. So they will take the lead 13-10. They take that into halftime, and then in the second half, the Nicholls State defense continues to play at such an elite level of football, forcing multiple turnovers on this Akron team. A good Akron team that ended up going undefeated in the regular season last year. This is a very talented Akron squad trying to continue to do that here, but Nicholls State is certainly giving them everything that they can handle right now, as they will chip in yet another field goal. And the Colonels will take a 6-point lead into the fourth quarter as we get another interception on the field. The linebacker is going to get his hands on it. Carlos Sims already had a big time sack in this game. Might as well add an interception on there as well. And a chance to possibly put this game on ice as Richards runs the option, pitches it out to Mr. Carter. Tell me, where have you been? They will go for the 2-point conversion, which they do not get in. So it is a 12-point lead. And now Akron is going to need nothing short of a miracle to win this football game. This could help them some as John Johnson gets that pass into the end zone. But they'll still need this onside kick if they want to preserve their timeouts in an attempt to pull this insane comeback. Kick is going to be up, and it's going to be recovered by the Nicholls State Colonels. So the onside kick attempt was no good in that regard. And now all Nicholls State needs to do is pick up this first down, and this game is going to be barbecue chicken. Is going to be over. We'll see if the Colonels can pick up a few yards here, as they're actually going to try to pass it. Hang on now. They're going to go for it. Oh, and it's going to be incomplete. And Akron will get one last shot to win the football game. Overtime out the window. Johnson steps up, fires over the middle, and it's going to be intercepted. That is KJ Emery with the kill strike. And the Nicholls State Colonels get a huge early season win. They beat the Akron Zips by a final score of 22-17. As they're going to be giving the old ball coach an old ice bath for him to remember this big time win. But that was not the only top 25 matchup here that we had in week number 3, as we got the Sanford Bulldogs going on the road, take on Texas Southern. Texas Southern coming off a pretty major upset. We did see them lose to Morgan State. They gave up a lot of points too, so we know this Texas Southern offense could put up the points, but can they slow down Sanford, who does get their primary offensive weapons, Ashton Hines being one of them, their senior quarterback. He's healthy again. Asante Randolph Jr. is also healthy as well. So we'll see what Sanford's got in them now that they got their full assortment of weapons, as they will hand it off to Asante Randolph Jr. Ball is on the ground. It continues to be on the ground. Finally, someone ends up recovering it, but Texas Southern cannot fully take advantage, have to settle for a 45-yard field goal attempt. Wasn't sure if that was going to go for the uprights, but the officials say that they will count that. So Texas Southern will build an early lead here, 6-0, as they're going to be a little bit more aggressive on their next offensive drive. Akbar is going to hand it off to the new tailback in town, and that's going to be a touchdown for the Texas Southern Tigers, making it a 13-0 lead. But Ashton Hines has some things to say about that as they try to get back into this game. They go to their tailback, Asante Randolph Jr., and they will instantly answer back, cutting it down to a 6-point game with 2:37 left to play here in this ball game. Now, Andrew Akbar did end up getting hurt. He actually broke his tailbone in this game, so backup quarterback has to step in and play the rest of this game, right? And it's not looking great for him, as Sanford gets another interception, and Bulldogs got a chance to take the lead as Ashton Hines throws into the end zone, and that is going to be a touchdown for the Bulldogs. And certainly a back and forth affair here in that first half, but in the second half though, we do start to see them Texas Southern Tigers. They start to take over a little bit, as that's a big time interception on Ashton Hines. Definitely needed that too as well, as the Tigers are going to be set up in the red zone. Hopefully he'll get his backup quarterback a little bit more comfortable, as they will not go with the play action, going with a straight passing play and finding one of your guys' customs. That is Solomon West, who's able to find his way into the end zone after the extra point, making it a 9-point game. So now it's a 2-possession game and a chance to put the dagger in there. Passes up, and it's going to be caught again. Another score for Solomon West. and 2 Solomon West touchdowns later solidify Texas Southern's first win of the season as they dispatched the Sanford Bulldogs 30-14 in this one to get their first win of the season. But we even had more top 25 matchups. We had 3, matter of fact. This is Northwestern State going on the road to take on the Northern Arizona Lumberjacks. And we'll see if the Northwestern State Demons then get themselves on some demon time, because I'll tell you what, this is a team that did not carry a lot of momentum through the end of the season. This is a team that was seen as a shoo-in to make a playoffs for much of last season, and then they kind of collapsed there in the last few weeks of the season. Northern Arizona coming off their second FCS playoff appearance. We'll see if they can get back there once again, though, as we'll see a new quarterback for Northwestern State, Jeremiah Hoodie, who's going to actually get a little bit of trickery going and get other receivers involved in this offense, but for a rushing touchdown. You love to see it going into the toolbox, and Northwestern State will build an early lead, 10-0. Going to be your score right now as Jeremiah Hoodie throws it right inside, but it's going to be intercepted. Jamal Lewis able to get the pick, and maybe this is what the spark that the Lumberjacks are looking for, because they were handled pretty well here in this game, right? They were not looking great, and they do at least get a field goal to cap that off, as Futai is going to hit it right through the uprights, one of your guys' customs as well. So Northern Arizona down by a touchdown, but that will not last forever, though, as Tyrone Wolf threw that ball into the end zone, and it makes it a 10-all game here going into halftime. Now, second half, Jeremiah Hoodie trying to throw over to the left-hand side, throwing off platform, but still able to get it to the receiver that he's looking for. He has his second touchdown of the game. And now the Demons have a 17-10 lead. But Tyrone looking to respond. He finds his receiver again down the sideline, and he's going to be gone like a girl in a country song. Now all knotted up at 17 apiece. Jeremiah with a chance to respond, but puts the ball on the ground. The ball is on the ground at the 32-yard line. And now it's the Lumberjacks. Can they complete the comeback? Hands the football off. Gonna find the end zone. It's LaMichael Wilkes, the junior custom, that's gonna slam the door on Northwestern State. And the Lumberjacks win this one 24-17 in what was an absolute thriller. Now, as for the other top 25 teams that having to play over the course of week number 3, we had some good ones. Western Carolina, they beat Appalachian State in the Battle of the Old Mountain Jug. This is a rivalry game, and because it's a rivalry game, a little bit closer than expected. Catamounts only winning 19-10 to get to 2-0. As for Southeast Missouri State, they continue their strong start to the season, getting to 2-0 against Southeast Louisiana by winning by a final score of 38-23. Tyler Johnson, he happened to be feeling himself. However, Florida A&M was almost able to pull the upset on the number 1 team in the nation, the New Hampshire Wildcats, but they do end up falling just short. New Hampshire does end up winning 26-20 to get to 2-0. James Madison, however, will not have the same issues as they played St. Thomas in non-conference play. And James Madison, they put up 69 points, which is very nice against St. Thomas. Heinz Heinland, one of your guys' customs, ends up throwing for 500 yards as well as 7 touchdowns. As for Portland State, they are in the top 25 and they open their season up against the Penn Quakers. However, Penn almost pulled the upset off as well. Penn only losing by a field goal as Portland State does win their first game of the season. Eastern Michigan, since they are in the top 25, they went to play against the Howard Bison, and the Eagles take care of business in that matchup, winning 31-13 and getting off to a 2-0 start. However, Eastern Kentucky will end up falling to the Southern Jaguars as the Jaguars pull off a big-time upset, 24-20 your final score, as the Jaguars were able to score 14 unanswered points in the fourth quarter. Sam Houston State, meanwhile, does not have that same issue as they easily handled University of Central Florida. The Kodiak Cats win 48-17 as David Bullock throws for 280 yards and 5 touchdowns. Eastern Illinois, however, was on its ropes against the Eastern Washington Eagles during non-conference action, but Eastern Illinois came out on top 38-27 as Lobdell was on absolute fire, throwing for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. Chattanooga, meanwhile, forces San Jose State to go 0-2 as Chattanooga Mocs win their opener 38-28 as Mark Spicer throws for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns in this game. Montana here in week number 3, though, almost slips up against Alabama State, but the Montana Grizzlies find a way to win, 21-16 being your final score, as the Grizzlies get to 2-0 here early in this season. As for Georgia Southern, they're looking to get back into the FCS playoffs after their embarrassing Year 5 performance. They start by beating Indiana State 35-19 as Krakowski goes for 115 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground in this one. Delaware, meanwhile, looking to build off the momentum that they created this past season, and they start by beating Dartmouth 27-17 in their opener as Lambert was a force to be reckoned with. North Dakota State, meanwhile, winning big against the Columbia Lions 38-6 being your score as Greg Keefe able to find his receivers in this one, 271 yards, and also had 4 total touchdowns too. But how about this for a surprise? A slow start for Arkansas Pine Bluff, not only losing, but losing big time here, 48-13 being your final score as the Aztecs are now 2-0 to start the season. And the last team featuring a top 25 team is Tennessee Martin taking on the Richmond Spiners, and the Skyhawks soar to a 34-9 victory. Henry Paris able to continue his strong collegiate start, 290 passing yards and 3 touchdowns on a way to his 2-0 record. Other notable games that I wanted to talk about in week number 3 include North Carolina A&T blowing out Villanova to start year number 6. They win 42-3. Temple also blowing off Hofstra 48-14, and that brings Temple to 2-0. Idaho State destroying Jackson State on the road as well, as Idaho State wins their opener 42-7. Grambling State also looking good against the Hampton Pirates, as Grambling State does win 45-10. Also, Texas State will get back into the top 25 after they get into the win column for the very first time this season, beating the McNeese State Cowboys 32-13. But Nicholls State, at least early on here in the schedule, they have a pretty difficult schedule to navigate. We're here in week number 4 now, and this time Nicholls State, they are here at home still, but they are taking on another top 25 team, this time the Eastern Kentucky Colonels, a team that also made the FCS playoffs last year, so definitely a lot of love here for Nicholls State. So if they can navigate the schedule as well as they are right now, then you might want to talk about a team that definitely deserves a first round bye. At least that's for sure. But we'll see what happens here as we're going to jump all the way into the second quarter, because if you're an offense fan, this is certainly not going to be the game for you. But in the second quarter, we finally see some points get up on the scoreboard as there's a fumble on the other end. Eastern Kentucky does end up recovering it, and that's the only major thing that happens in the first half. Eastern Kentucky will take a 7-0 lead, but we get late into the second half, we start seeing some things pick up a little bit here as we got a 1:31 left to play, but there's another fumble, and it's going to be recovered. That was Robbie O'Brien, one of your guys' customs, that did end up going ahead, forcing that fumble that will be recovered by the Colonels. And now the Colonels are on the move, trying to push this ball into the end zone. We'll see if they hand it off to J.D. Brooks, one of your guys' customs, replacing Louis Rose. And Brooks finds the end zone. 14-0 lead. And in a game like this, every point is going to matter. And we're looking at possibly the Colonels losing their first game of the season, but they don't go down without a fight. They have a chance to tie this game, but need to pick up the 4th down conversion. Ball's in the air. It's caught. Broken tackle later, and Nicholls State is going to actually force overtime. So we have overtime. And in the first couple of overtimes, it was a glorified horse game between the kickers. Both teams settle in for kicks. But in the third overtime, we finally see some possible movement here as Henderson He's just going to be unfortunate here, trying to get rid of the football, wanting to avoid that sack, and Nicholls State just making a great play on the ball, and it sets up Webster to make this 29-yard field goal, and this would push Nicholls State to 3-0 early in the season. We'll see if he can kick it right through. The kick is up, and it's going to be good! Nicholls State down by 2 scores in the fourth quarter. They will end up winning the football game 23-20. And now we jump into our other top 25 game that we happen to have in week number 4. We got the Delaware Blue Hens taking on James Madison, who is a top 10 team. I do believe that this is a game that we ended up seeing in the conference championship last year, a game in which Delaware won. But James Madison, they are led by a new quarterback, Hans Heinlein, who is putting a Heisman-worthy campaign together here in the early going, 11 touchdowns versus 1 interception. Meanwhile, Blumenthal is not playing, so Brian Ramsey is going to be handing the ball off quite a bit to Paris McPherson, who's on some preseason Heisman watch lists, and you can see why, as Paris McPherson takes it all the way to the crib. 79-yard touchdown run, and it's just a perfect start that you can dream of for the Delaware Blue Hens on the road, trying to silence that crowd right away, as they will be playing the football right back over to James Madison. DeMarcus Pride trying to take it back, but he puts the ball on the ground as well. Eventually, we do end up seeing Delaware recover. And now, inside the 5-yard line, McPherson is going to have another carry, breaks the tackle, fights through a second defender as Jose Pilo could not bring down McPherson in time. So Delaware again puts another touchdown up on the board. It's already 14-0, and this Delaware crowd is going crazy. Heinlein just having a hard time navigating as he throws the ball up, and he's going to try to connect with DeMarcus Pride, but ends up being intercepted instead. That goes all the way into the end zone. A touchdown for the Delaware Blue Hens. And you want to talk about a demoralizing performance? We're seeing one right now, as that was a 75-yard scamper into the end zone as well. So now James Madison down 21-0 as Hans Heinlein, this time he's going to go into the trick of bags a little bit, but the trick play goes horribly wrong. You could not have it go any worse than that. And already down by 3 scores, James Madison, they definitely and desperately need a stop here on offense. We'll see if Brian Ramsey can choke here, as if it's broke, why not fix it, man? And it's certainly not broken at all. Paris McPherson gets another touchdown on the board. Already his 3rd touchdown of the game. And we have like 3 quarters left to play. James Madison, you know, I figured Delaware could win this game, but I thought it would be a lot more competitive than this. 28-0, certainly a shocker, but they won't be kept off the scoreboard forever. They do eventually score with Kyle Lockhart, but down 28-7 at the half. We'll see if Heinlein can lead a great second half performance and putting the football on the ground. That's simply not it. You cannot do that when you're down by as much as you're down right now. And the worst thing is, you're putting the ball inside the 5-yard line like that. This ain't it. That is simply not it at all. So now, goal line situation inside the 5-yard line as McPherson again with another carry, and James Madison, they just cannot do anything with this guy at all, as that will make it 38-7 eventually, as Heinlein trying to lead one more gasp for the James Madison Dukes. He'll drop back again, as Heinlein's just not having a good day. He was just straight up not having a good time at all. But someone who's having a better time, though, is Delano Dell. He gets his first career interception, was actually redshirted back in season number 5. So his first sense of playing time, he makes the most of it. And it leads to yet another touchdown as well, as Delaware is going to cruise to a 45-7 win to get to 2-0 here in the young season. As for other top 25 games that happened over the course of week 4, Southeast Missouri State, they continue to roll here in the early season, this time blowing out Prairie View A&M 47-17 as Tyler Johnson again throws for 5 touchdown passes. Meanwhile, the Sanford Bulldogs notched their first win of the season when they took on the Rhode Island Rams, Sanford winning 52-17 as Ashton Hines returns back to his previous year's form. As for the New Hampshire Wildcats, they will remain undefeated after beating Temple on the road. They went in the Lincoln Financial Field and winning 33-24, as it was a very close game for both squads. However, the Akron Zips will remain in the top 25 for now as they beat the Penn Quakers 33-14. Akron is now 2-1 as John Johnson throws for 280 yards and 3 touchdowns. Georgia Southern also getting back to the team that we're used to seeing in this series, beating the Citadel 27-7 in a very defensively stout performance for the Georgia Southern Eagles. As for the Cardiac Cats, it was a little bit of a defensive game here as Sam Houston State gets ready to wrap up conference play. But the Cardiac Cats still win 22-3 as Chris Allen ends up with 3 receiving touchdowns. He was the entire Sam Houston State offense today. However, we have a shocking upset develop as Appalachian State is able to beat Texas State 32-20 as the Mountaineers notch their first win of the season, whereas Texas State is now under 500, a disappointing season so far. North Dakota State will not fall under that same trap though as they beat Western Kentucky 38-28 as the Bison win their second game of the season, doing so by getting 29 points in the second quarter. San Diego State also is going to remain undefeated on this season, but also a closer game than expected. The Western Illinois Leatherbacks took the game to overtime, however they ran out of juice in that overtime period. Sacramento State also moving forward as they beat the Jackson State Tigers 27-21. Jack Quinn is now starting quarterback for the Sacramento State Hornets, and he had 3 total touchdowns in Sacramento State's first game of the season. As for Chattanooga, they come in ranked number 16 here in week number 4, and they blow out Southern Illinois. The Salukis were no match as they lost 42-7. Mike Thomas was on a roll today with 100 yards receiving and 3 total touchdowns. As for Utah State, they continue to roll through the early going of this season, beating the Kangaroos of UMKC 39-27, as it's been a resurgent year for the Utah State Aggies so far. Speaking of resurgent seasons, Eastern Michigan also having a great year so far, winning 28-13 against the Elon Phoenix on the road, which means EMU is also going to get out to a 3-0 start. Meanwhile, the Northern Arizona Lumberjacks hosting Morgan State as Northern Arizona coming off their big win against Northwestern State. They do not have a letdown here, winning 41-24. Gibson had 18 catches in this game, 2 of them going into the end zone. In the last top 25 game that I wanted to talk about is New Mexico State. They now get to 2-0 after a 52-28 win over the Mavericks of Omaha. Bracken, the new quarterback for the Aggies, goes for 500 yards and has 6 touchdown passes to go with that too. And of course, other notable results that did happen over the course of week number 4. We do have Alabama State blowing out Stephen F. Austin 41-10 as the Hornets are now 2-1. Northwestern State gets back to 500 as well. They beat Florida Atlantic 42-28, and that does return them back to number 25 in the country. So here we are now in week number 5, and yet another top 25 matchup for the Nicholls State Colonels. Their 3rd one in the row. This time it has them here in conference play, taking on the Georgia Southern Eagles, who are looking to redeem themselves from their terrible year number 5, where they end up missing the playoffs even though they were a defending national champion. They had all that going. So we'll see if Georgia Southern can make a statement here against the Nicholls State Colonels, or will the Colonels officially have the torch passed to them here in the SEC? We're going to find out as we'll pick things up here late in the first quarter. Still no score, but they are facing a 3rd and long, though, as Rich is going to drop back the pass. He's going to fire to the right-hand side, and it's caught! Touchdown, Colonels! And Nicholls State right away, able to make it a 7-0 lead. Marquez Lewis giving up that touchdown. So down 7-0, but things are only going to get worse. Not only do we see a fumble for the Georgia Southern offense, but we do get the experience of seeing a big boy touchdown. Those always hit a little different. And the Colonels playing some great football right now, up 14-0 already, as Russell will have to punt this football away back to the Nicholls State football team, as they did end up going 3 and out. And that might be a bad decision, as it's going to be a special teams touchdown for the Nicholls State Colonels. So we already see the 3 rings of Thanos completed. An offensive touchdown, a defensive touchdown, and also a special teams touchdown, as Nicholls State absolutely rolling right now. Carter is going to find the end zone again. And the Colonels are going to roll, man. They win 41-15. Georgia Southern, while they don't get shut out, all their points was when the game didn't even matter. But if it does make Georgia Southern look a little bit better, they weren't the only team blown out here in week number 5, as Chattanooga rolls to 3-0 after a 50-7 lead over the Rhode Island Rams. The Rams were left without their horns, as they were completely clueless against the Chattanooga Mocs. As for James Madison, though, after being blown out against Delaware, they did rebound against the University of Central Florida, winning 38-24, and they're now 3-1 on the season. Southeast Missouri State, meanwhile, continues to roll as they blow out Western Kentucky. Well, not blow out Western Kentucky, but they did beat Western Kentucky, though, 31-20, as Parker ends up putting up 100 yards and catching 2 touchdown passes as well. As for Sacramento State, they continue their strong start to the season as they beat the Brown Bears 52-17. McCall was the bell cow for the Sacramento State squad, as he had 140 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground as well. New Mexico State, meanwhile, proves that they are indeed a top 25 team, beating the teams that they're supposed to beat. They just take down Southern Utah 42-23, as the Aggies are 3-0. Riley with 10 catches, 120 yards, and 3 touchdowns as well. Southern Utah was completely clueless against him. San Diego State also is going to be undefeated as of right now. They beat Northern Iowa, who's still searching for that first win. Aztecs winning 33-21, as Cameron also having 3 rushing scores on the ground. Akron, on the other hand, after a tough loss in week number 3, they've rebounded pretty well, beating Southern Illinois this time 45-35. John Johnson continuing his strong play, throwing for over 400 yards and 5 passing touchdowns. As for the Delaware Blue Hens, they will remain undefeated on the season, this time beating Bethune-Cookman 38-17, as Brian Ramsey, a legitimate threat in this conference, 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in the win. Moving on to another top 10 team, we got the Tennessee Martin Skyhawks taking on their conference opponent Jacksonville State. Tennessee Martin winning 41-17, as the Skyhawks defense answers the call, as they are able to get another big win. However, we will have a big upset, though, as Murray State is going to beat Eastern Illinois on the road. 30-22 ends up being your final score, as Bobby McNeil was absolutely electric in the upset, throwing for over 270 yards, but more importantly, 4 touchdown passes as well. Also remaining undefeated is Utah State, as the Aggies took on the Idaho Vandals, and they were vandalized in this one, 35-28 for a Utah State victory. Johnson in this one throwing for 280 yards and 3 touchdown passes in the win. But not only does Sam Houston State lose their first game of the season here in week number 5, they get absolutely torn apart by McNeese State. The Cowboys winning 45-13 against the Cardiac Cats, as Brooks did a little bit of everything. 100 yards on the ground, but also caught 2 passing touchdowns too. Speaking of top 10 teams that might have disappointed, New Hampshire almost lost. Delaware State gave it everything that they had, but Bruno Baggio able to lead a critical drive in the 4th quarter, helping New Hampshire remain undefeated. He did have 240 yards and 4 touchdowns in this game. However, we might see a team leave the top 25 when the next poll is released, and that is Eastern Kentucky. They lose yet again 34-20, and they're now just 1-3 on the season. Definitely been a disappointing year for the Colonels so far. Meanwhile, Portland State continues its tough run as they get to 2-0 to start the season, beating up the Princeton Tigers 35-14. Justin Clay ending up with 120 yards and 2 touchdown grabs as well. Northwestern State also proving that they should remain in the top 25 as they beat the Citadel in conference play 31-17. Matt Lewis did assume the starting duties in this particular game and performed well, throwing for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. Northern Arizona, though, probably had one of the more exciting games of week number 5 as they went toe-to-toe with Idaho State, but Northern Arizona does escape with a 38-35 win in overtime. Tyrone Wolf ended up with 300 yards passing as well as 3 touchdown passes. And the last top 20 matchup that featured a top 25 team is the Sanford Bulldogs, although I don't think they'll be ranked much longer. They lose 34-31 to the Tennessee State Tigers, who are now 3-1, as Dante Thomas threw for 380 yards and 4 touchdown passes. But outside of the top 25, there was still some pretty interesting results there in week number 5. For example, we have Central Michigan taking care of business against the Indiana State Sycamores 38-7. That gets the Chippewas to 3-0 on the season. So we already made it through 5 weeks through the season, since we didn't really have that many top 25 matchups to cover necessarily. Now, that being said, this is what the top 25 does look like going into the second third of the season. So this is now going into week number 6. Got 2 teams that are getting first place votes. That's New Hampshire and Western Carolina. But other than that, a lot of stability here in this top 6 to 8 here. Sacramento State at 3, North Dakota State at 4, followed by Southeast Missouri State to round out your top 5. Outside of your top 5, though, you got Montana at 6, Tennessee Martin moving up 1 spot to number 7. But then at number 8, things start to get interesting. Delaware is now finding themselves as the number 8 team in college football. They are undefeated as of right now. Nicholls State, with their insanely tough schedule, I mean, you guys seen it. They played 3 top 25 matchups in the last few weeks. It's been kind of insane. They handled that extremely well, though. San Diego State has also looked pretty good early in the year. They're undefeated, as is Chattanooga. They just blew out Rhode Island. They're a very good-looking football team as well. And, of course, Northern Arizona had a little bit of a scare against Idaho State, but they did end up pulling it out. They're sitting at number 12. Now, in the bottom half of the top 25, we have Utah State at 13. They're also undefeated as of right now. But we got our first team that had a big drop this past week, and that's Eastern Illinois. They lost their first game of the season. They've only played 2 games so far, but the Murray State loss definitely hurts. James Madison also rebounding nicely. They did lose pretty badly to Delaware, but bouncing back against UCF does feel pretty good in terms of a confidence booster. However, Eastern Michigan, they move up a couple of spots, even though they were actually on bye for week 5. Portland State also doing the same thing, moving up a couple of spots too. Rounding out your top 25, though, we got Georgia Southern still at number 18, even with the loss to Nicholls State. Texas Southern is in here still at number 19. Akron is up here too at number 20. And rounding out your group is New Mexico State at 21. Sam Houston State, who's still in the top 25, but now down to number 22. Murray State, who comes in after being unranked, but that upset against Eastern Illinois does help their cause. Rounding out the group is Northwestern State at 24, and the Alabama State Hornets at 25, who now also enter those top 25 ranks. But these are also the teams that are currently receiving votes as of right now. Montana State is in there. They start out as a top 25 team in the preseason. Tennessee State I had as a preseason sweeper to make the playoffs, and they're receiving votes as well. Grambling State and Sanford are also in that conversation. And speaking of Sanford, they were one of the 2 teams that dropped out of the poll after week 5. Eastern Kentucky was that other team as well. But after this first third of the season so far, this is how the Heisman Trophy race is currently shaking out. Carl Allen, the sophomore from Sam Houston State, is actually leading the way right now. He's having a solid season with already 11 touchdowns to his name. But we got a great list of guys here. Brad Odrowsey, the senior wide receiver, he has almost 600 yards and 5 touchdowns. He's been a go-to guy for Heinz Heimlin. At number 3, we also have Travis Johnson, the senior quarterback for the Red Hawks, who has been playing some pretty good football. Really a breakout year for Travis Johnson right now. Really trying to, really prove that he can be a great quarterback at the FCS level and maybe boost that NFL stock a little bit. And then rounding out your group is Michael Johnson, the junior redshirt from Utah State. This is the first year in which he's actually the starting quarterback. And Paris McPherson helping fuel possibly a deep run in the making for the Delaware Blue Hens. Might be a movie for them, possibly. Already having a great year and really helping in terms of making a statement against the James Madison Dukes back in week number 4. But guys, we are already a third of the way through the season, and a couple things that I want to ask you guys. What are your thoughts? What has really surprised you through this first third of the season? Let me know down in the comments section, as well as how you feel about this new format moving forward in the FCS Dynasty. In addition, if you enjoyed the content, make sure you go ahead, smack that like button. And if sports gaming, specifically in that college football universe, is something that you guys enjoy, this is a channel for you. And because of that, I strongly encourage you to smash that subscribe button as well, so that you can join this community here, man. But with that being said, this is John J Gaming on the mic signing off. Hoping you guys are all out there having a good one. Take care, everybody.